Thanks for tuning in to the Drive On podcast, where we're focused on giving hope and strength to the entire military community. Whether you're a veteran, active duty, guard, reserve, or a family member, this podcast will share inspirational stories and resources that are useful to you. I'm your host, Scott DeLucio, and now let's get on with the show. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Drive On podcast. Today, my guest is Nicole Kerr. Nicole is an Air Force veteran and the author of the book, You Are Deathless, a near-death experience taught me how to fully live and not fear death. The book will largely be the focus of our conversation and the situation that led up to her writing this book. But the book provides readers with an understanding of their own relationship with things like God, the meaning of life, how to live well, and even how to die. So welcome to the show, Nicole. I'm glad to have you here.
Thank you so much, Scott. I am delighted and grateful and just enthusiastic to be with you today and talk about these things because they're really important.
Well, they are. And it is unfortunate that it takes sometimes a situation like a near-death experience to make us realize how to live. And having someone who has been in a situation like yours, and we're going to get into your whole background and situation in just a minute here, but having someone who's gone through that, it really does show a different perspective on life, because there are some people who have had tragic things happen to them. Maybe not a near death experience, but other tragedies could be classified in the same kind of category
Yeah.
as tragic, right? And they make that become their identity, and it's just bogs them down. They're unable to move on from that experience. And actually, the last episode that I recorded, so it would be the episode that came out just before this one, we talked a lot about how different adversities in life are really holding people back. It's hard for people to understand that there is something better past
Yeah.
whatever this pain is that you're going through. So, what before we dive in too much about that, why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself and your background and who you are, so that the listeners who may not be familiar with you know who we're talking to?
Sure. Well, I'm originally from Mississippi, so the deep South. Okay. I was born at Camp Lejeune and I now live in New Bern, which is about 30 miles away from Camp Lejeune. So I've literally come 360 degrees back to the same area. I spent 17 years in Hawaii, met my husband there, love the aloha spirit, but the cost of living out there, it is pretty high. So when my husband retired, we moved to New Bern and we just love it out here. We love the accessibility. So I'm basically a Southern girl and was raised by a military father. He graduated from U.S. Air Force Academy in class of 60 and wanted one of his 4 kids to follow in his footsteps. And so here I volunteered to do that. I was the people pleaser, and that's an identity that I took on. And I'm a recovering people pleaser. Okay. Because that identity, if you take it to an extreme, at the end of the day, you feel like a roach that just got stomped on. I mean, there's nothing in it for you. And so even though I had 2 brothers, they were going to the Marine Military Academy down in Harlingen, Texas to prep, but they didn't have the grades and they just didn't have the desire to do it. So I applied, and in case your listeners don't remember, in 1976, the government allowed women into the military academies. And so class of 80 was the first one. My class was 86. So I was still there when it was really new for women to be in these service academies. And let me tell you, it was not easy. It was very abusive. As a dually at any of them, you're going to get hazed. So you're going to have mental abuse. You're going to have physical abuse. They'll pull you out of your room, take you down to the obstacle course in the middle of the night or whatever it is, and that's just what it is. And then you add the element of females in there, and there was sexual abuse going on. So we're still dealing with it in the military today. Unfortunately, there was a report out about 6 months ago about West Point and the Air Force Academy. Their numbers are not going down, they're going up. And so, it's just mind blowing that we're going in the wrong direction with this, and so many, almost 40 years later, that we still haven't been able to get the numbers down and this, gotten a handle on it. So Needless to say, I applied. I didn't think I was going to get in. I mean, I was a model at the time. I was doing junior achievement. I was doing nothing that had to do with the military. Okay. So my dad was like, you need to go, put in an application. They're now letting women go. It's going to build character, going to make you a woman that few can rival. I mean, he pumped me up really good. So I applied and, it's a process. You got to get a congressional nomination, all this stuff. Well, in April, my principal calls and says, Representative Wayne Dowdy's on the phone. And I'm like, oh. And he says, Nicole, congratulations. You've been selected in the class of 86. And I just sat there stunned because now I had to go. Okay. I couldn't back out of it now. I would disappoint so many people. So, I got up there in June. And let me tell you, this was when you had 6 weeks of basic training. We didn't have cell phones. The first phone call we got was 3 weeks into basic training. And we had got to call home. We had 3 minutes. Okay. I heard my mother's voice, Scott, and I proceeded to cry and hyperventilate for 3 minutes. I could not get a word out. And so the whole phone call was just, and so my 3 minutes was up, flick. And the commanding officer just told me to get my shit together, go sit over there and get my shit together. And I didn't realize until years later that was a panic attack, and I wanted my mother or dad to get on the phone and say, Nicole, it's okay to come home. It's okay if this isn't what you thought it was going to be. It's okay to quit. And I needed that permission and I didn't get anything. And my mother told me years later, I asked her dad, what did we do to her? And he said, oh, she'll be fine. And I was not fine. Okay. I then had to go to remedial, our flight, and do one-on-one for the next 3 weeks in Jacks Valley. And I didn't think I was going to survive. I literally thought I was going to die doing, that I just couldn't do another push up because they always wanted you to do push ups in class number, your class 86. There's no way I could do 86 push ups. My arms just would not do it. So I don't know how, Scott, I survived that first year because it was just like I lived in fear. I just constant fear. And I think most cadets do that you're going to screw up or, fail out. There's so many, every minute somebody's on your case. So
Right.
I got out of that, made it through Hell Week. I didn't think I would, but the way they talked about Hell Week, it was like, oh my God, I'm certainly going to die. And I made it through that. But that was the last class that they did the traditional Hell Week because so many cadets got sick. They fed us Mexican food. And then we went out in full camos, and it was one of the hottest days in Colorado Springs, and people were throwing up left and right. The ambulances were coming up on the terrazzo, and everybody was getting IVs, and it was like, it made national news. So they had to scale it back after that. I don't think they serve Mexican food here anymore. But needless to say, got through that, got through CRE training, POW training. I don't know how I did it, but I did it. And then the beginning of my sophomore year, I knew I didn't want to come back. I just knew it. That's the year you have to commit. And the year started out with a big squadron party, and I got there late, but I was one of the last to leave. And I left with a guy who was a senior because we can't have cars out there till we're juniors or seniors. And I wanted him, I said, do you mind giving me a ride back? He had a Corvette convertible, okay, standard car of Air Force guys, I think, at the academy. And
Standard issue,
so,
right?
yeah, and so needless to say, we never made it back to the academy. And what happened is my memory of the crash, I remember we stopped at a bar. He's like, oh, we got plenty of time. I'm like, we got to be back by 7:25 or we're going to get in trouble. And we didn't make it. He wanted to stop by a bar. He had a whole nother agenda. And me did not clue in on it because I never dated. I came from a very controlling religious house, and my dad didn't want me dating, but yet he wants to send me to a school with 4,000 guys, right? So his rules were no smoking, no drinking, and no dating cadets. And so when the accident happened, we had stopped at the bar. We each had 2 beers. That was the first 2 beers I had. And then he wanted to go watch the Rocky Mountain sunset. And that's where it got into, oh, this is going further than it needs to in a sexual thing. Now I know what his agenda is. So I said, no, let's get back on the road. And that's the last thing I remember until I woke up in the ICU at Penrose Community Hospital. I now know what happened when I pieced together the medical records, the district attorney's report. The paramedic that actually I credit saving my life came to the hospital about 10 weeks. I was in the hospital 4 months. I was pronounced dead at the scene. They had some bypassers in the house, heard the crash and came out and couldn't get any vitals on me. So they went and got a blanket and covered me up. It took about 10 to 15 minutes for the volunteer fire department to get out there. And I was clinically dead that time. And the paramedic pulled back the blanket, couldn't get any vitals on me. So he did a sternal knuckle press. I don't know if you know what that is.
Yep.
Hurts. And
Oh, yeah.
and it's designed to hurt, so it'll elicit a pain response. So what the pain response was, my right pupil flickered and then dilated. So he knew I was alive. And when you think about this from a soul perspective, what do we say spiritually? That the eyes are
It uh, like the is it like the window to the soul? That
exactly right.
what the
Yes.
saying is? Yeah, I had to think right there. Yeah.
Yeah. So at that moment, my soul came back in my body, and he was all of a sudden able to get a blood pressure of 60 over zero. Okay. Which is basically dead. He had to
Right.
start an IV in my neck, couldn't get one in my arm. And most EMTs and paramedics are not required to do that. They just have to be able to get it in your arm. Got me to the nearest community hospital, did CPR the whole way. And when I got to the hospital, basically, they just needed to stabilize me. And that took all night just to do that. And then it was 7 weeks in ICU. I cut off my left foot, that much of it was hanging on by that much. I severed my right wrist. I broke my pelvis on both sides. I had a 4th-degree laceration between my anal and sphincter, cut out a huge chunk of skin out of the inside of my right thigh, road burn from skidding on the pavement. So I took off a couple layers of skin on my face. And you can see when you look at the car, which is, if you want a sample chapter of the first chapter of my book, which details the crash and shows you pictures, you can just go to my website and I'll be happy to send you that for free. I mean, the book's only $9.99, so it's not, it's basically a frappuccino. So it has pictures in it. Or, you can just go and I'll send you that. You can at least read the first chapter and see if you want to continue reading it. But it was touch and go there for almost the whole 4 months. And I had infection set in, all kinds of things happened. So my memory of it did not come back for another 19 years. Okay. So I went into rehab. I got a honorable medical discharge and tried to figure out what I want to do with my life. And so I had to go home to rehab, and I had to basically start over at infancy. I had to learn to walk again. I had to learn to go to the bathroom again. All the daily functions of daily living, I couldn't do. I was in a bed for 4 months. Okay. 64 pints of blood. That's like redoing your system, 8 times? Okay. Had to
Something
have
like that. Yeah.
had to have a colostomy put on me. So I was in bad shape. And then I had 6 major operations. And in one of those, it was a code blue. They lost me. They told my parents, they were in the chapel. We've lost Nicole. You need to make arrangements to bury her. And then 2 minutes later, here comes the surgical nurse. Her heart started going again. So I really was trying to leave. Okay. And then there was another episode of a near death experience where my lungs were filling up with fluid and I couldn't breathe. I was drowning, and they would drain my lungs, but they would fill right back up. So it's the feeling of drowning, and I just wanted to die. That fear of not getting enough air is still with me. So when we lived in Hawaii, my husband would scuba and I would snorkel. I'm like, I got to stay on top of the water so I can get my air.
Sure.
Yeah. So fast forward 19 years, I'm working at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention in Atlanta. I walk out of Starbucks, my usual routine. I get in the car. I see exactly how I was sitting in the car at the Corvette. Exactly. And I will tell you that the driver was charged with vehicular assault, DUI. He was in the hospital a week. He had some injuries on his back, but his blood alcohol was double. His dad wore 3 stars, was the Army Corps of Engineers. He made one call to the superintendent at the academy and said, my son's going to graduate. Okay. I don't care what you do to him. He's going to graduate. Any other cadet would have been kicked out for so many different violations. So there's where rank has its privilege. And they covered up the fact that they supplied alcohol to underage cadets. The officers left before all the cadets left. I mean, there were so many violations that had happened. And needless to say, Law and Order is my favorite show now because it's like I want justice done, you know?
Yes.
So for me, the next 19 years was my parents didn't believe that I needed any mental health. They thought God would be my psychiatrist. And so I went on with my life basically just from healing physically and went back into the same family structure of going back to church and a Southern Baptist church and Lutheran and all of that. I had to start all over, as a 19-year-old instead of breaking free and becoming my own person. I became really codependent with my mother and relied on her for everything. So that was a huge issue when I finally left home and went to live with my sister. I nosedived because I didn't give any mental health help or trauma help. And I developed an eating disorder as a result of that. I would binge compulsive eating, and that stayed with me for almost 20 years. And so, our body finds ways to compensate with the trauma and the pain. I also became very controlling. I had to have myself, it's like I wouldn't go in the car with anybody if they'd been drinking. I mean, I had all these rules set around me so I could keep myself safe. And so, I managed to get to work at CDC. And then when I saw how I was sitting in the car, I was like, oh my gosh, I had one leg up on the dashboard and the other one across it, at your knee where you bend your knee. First of all, let me tell you, don't ever put your feet on the dashboard and don't ever hang your feet out the car. Okay. Or do that. The ER nurse told me recently, she goes, that is the worst way to get the most serious injuries is to have your legs up or out of the car. So keep your feet on the floor mat. So I was like, okay. But anyway, that aside, I started remembering, I went to my chiropractor instead of work, and these things called repressed memories, okay, started coming up. And I'm like, why 19 years later? And it's because my body finally felt safe. I started to get into therapy myself. I started to, you know, it- do all of this stuff, not from the VA's perspective, just on my own. And I think I really started to begin to unravel some of the trauma there. And what I remembered is that I detail it in the book exactly how we crashed into this boulder. And the other side of, if we're showing, I don't know if you guys can see that.
Yeah.
Okay, that's a 65 Corvette convertible passenger side. Okay, so
And it
unsurvivable.
looks compact enough to be the size of about a bicycle.
Yeah, yeah.
How crushed
Yeah,
everything is.
it was beyond total. It was like it was at
Yeah.
the salvage center and they had just done that.
Right.
So needless to say, I remembered that I flew out through the windshield butt up. That's why I had so many injuries on the inside of my legs and the
Uh,
vagina and anal sphincter area. I just cut all that up, but it saved my spine and it saved my brain basically. So I remembered this, it was like Casper the Ghost kind of thing coming and lifting me up as soon as I got airborne. Okay. I froze in that airborne position. My soul flew out of me. So I didn't feel when I landed. I knew when I landed, though, I was going to die. I knew it. And I couldn't stop myself. I couldn't will myself. I couldn't do anything. This is that feeling of loss of control over events. I can't stop this from happening. And I knew that I was going to die. And I was just like, oh my God, there goes my life. And so I go up to a different level. And I just recently figured out it was my grandfather in an angel form. I'm 58 and my grandfather died at 58 and he just came to see me in a meditation or a vision and said he was the one that came in angel form and lifted me up. So I went to this level, not as a human, I'm in a spirit form. Okay. I could look down and see myself. I was in a ditch. I could see the clothes I was wearing and I had no life in me. I was basically a corpse. And so I was like, "Oh my goodness." And the white lights that I had remembered, that was the only thing I remembered for 19 years. That was that feeling of being in a cocoon or a chrysalis. It was so soothing. I was wrapped in it. It was beyond unconditional love. It was just beauty. It was brilliance. There was no pain, there was no suffering, there was no any of that. And I just remember the colors. They're colors that are not in the Crayola color box. Let me put that there are more colors in life, you know? And if you think about the color white, what does white do with other colors?
It kind of washes them out.
Well, it absorbs them.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah,
White absorbs all other colors.
yeah.
So when you think about being in this white light, you're in a kaleidoscope of these beautiful colors and you're being held and it's like, that's God. That is the experience of God. You know, when you take love and you say love is not an emotion, love is an energy, that is love. And one of the common lessons from near death experience is that love is all that matters and is the source of all that exists. So if it's the source of all that exists, that is God. God is love, period. And if you think of energy as love, that would be that energy. And almost every single near death experiences the white light. Raymond Moody talked about that in his book. He coined the term near death. So anyway, I was up there and I could hear other spirits talking. Now they weren't talking in English. I don't know how I understood them, but I understood them. And they were saying, "Hey, we here on earth, we need to ask for help. Okay. Because of free will, they're not going to intervene. The angelic realm is not going to intervene on our behalf. So we have to remember to ask them for help. And you may think it's stupid to ask for a parking space from the angels, but believe you me, people that do it, they get a parking space. It can be anything, teeny tiny to big stuff, but you have to ask for help. Otherwise, they're not going to intervene unless it's an emergency like my situation. So that's the other message. My message was to tell people not to fear death. I was told I was going back, and I was like, no, I don't want to go back. Because I could see that body, and I knew going back in my body, I was going to have a lot of pain and a lot of suffering. And especially going into my home environment where there was so much rigidity around religion and God being this dual God, meaning God was love on one hand, but then if you didn't obey the rules, it was punitive and judgmental, and the wrath of God was going to come on you and you were going to hell and you would be eternally separated. That's not what I experienced at all about God on the other side. God is internal. God is not external. You are one, you are a spark of God. You are one with God. And so after that, I was like, I woke up in ICU and then I went back to my original, I had to stuff that down. And the first thing I remember saying when my commanding officer came in was, oh, I thought, oh my God, don't tell my dad he's going to kill me because I broke his rules. So I'm worried about that instead of I almost died and I'm barely alive. And, the fear that my father instilled. I mean, you remember the movie, The Great Santini?
I haven't seen it. No.
Okay. It's pretty old, but it really is. It's about a Marine father who raised his family in a really controlled environment. And so it was not, my parents today don't believe in the God that I saw over there. They still very much believe by the Bible, literal interpretations. And that's just was not my experience. And it's not true. And it keeps people in fear. So I wrote the book because fear is a low vibration and fear keeps you from having clarity. And if you don't have clarity in your life, you're going to be making decisions based on fear, which is the absolute worst way to make a decision. You're going to be coming from your amygdala, which is that fight, flight, or fear, instead of your prefrontal cortex, which is your executive reasoning and thinking
Reason.
part. This part gets hijacked by this part, just like that. So I think my credential that would speak to people the most now is BTDT, and I put that on the book because I've been there, done that. It doesn't matter the other degrees or whatever. I'm finally got 100% disability from the VA. That was a marathon, and I will tell people you have just got to be persistent and persistent. But I had to appeal 3 times. I just 2 years ago got the 100% because I've had massive migraines my whole time. And they told me that there was no documentation related to a head injury. And it didn't matter that my face skidded on there. And then when I moved to New Bern, I went to the veterans and the guy goes, well, just look at what the doctor said. Patient thought initially dead. That should do it. That should tell them that you have a head injury. And sure enough, he sent that in and they came back and agreed with him. I went,
Sure.
40 years almost it took me to get this, So I understand that whole VA system and it's just, frustrating. And if you have PTSD, which is what I just got diagnosed with 2 years ago, I have been misdiagnosed so many times, I can't even tell you, and now, I'm at a point where they just changed mental health providers. I can't get an appointment for 8 months. So still not working for us. Let's put it that way. There's a lot of
Right.
gaps. And thank God, that my husband has insurance as well. And that I have enough resources around me to when I get in a panic attack or PTSD, that I can get myself, calm down or understand what's going on. But
Sure.
it's hard to deal with.
It is. And it is unfortunate that there are so many flaws in the current system and that it takes so long for certain individuals. It seems like sometimes some people have a real easy time getting things approved and pushed through. Sometimes it's a real clear cut case where
Yeah.
it's like, okay, well, I have all the evidence. Here's all the information. Okay. Yep. Boom. It's approved and you move on. But then in other cases, like in yours, which should be pretty clear cut, I would think,
Yeah.
obviously I'm not looking at all the documentation
Right.
myself and everything like that, but in my opinion, I would think it would be pretty clear cut and it should just be approved. But for whatever reason, it wasn't until just recently. Thankfully it was approved. But I guess at the end of the day, there's flaws in any system. I think
Yes.
when you have
Yeah.
the scariest words are "I'm from the government and I'm here to help," because
Right.
they're
Right.
not always the best,
Buyer
right?
beware on that one for sure. Yeah.
Sure. Um, but all joking aside, there are some flaws in the system and we should look to address that. But I'd like to go back to your experience. You had that near death experience where it was that out of body experience where you weren't in your body anymore. You were looking at the shell
My
of
soul my
who
soul
you were.
actually
Right.
cracked and yes, and went out of my body.
And
Yes.
And you remember all of this stuff now, maybe not immediately thereafter. Maybe that's just a defense mechanism that your body had to protect you from
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
traumatic event and the traumatic memories of that. But, it is possible to remember these things over
Absolutely.
time as
Yeah.
you heal and as your body feels more comfortable with where you are, feels safe
Safe.
in
Yeah.
your situation. It's able to allow some of those memories to come out and so that they can be processed. But I think it's if you had maybe a garbage disposal in your sink where you put like food scraps and stuff like that. You took the whole entire turkey from Thanksgiving and tried to shove it down there. You're not going to get it all in.
No.
But if you take little bits at a time and throw little bits of that down there, then you'll be able to process, the whole thing eventually. And I think maybe in a case like yours and many other traumatic experiences, you need to be able to process things little bits at a time. You can't bite off the
Yeah.
whole
It's
thing at
exactly
once,
right.
right?
And that's why my memory came back 19 years later, and it took me another 2 decades to write the book. The book just came out in August. So people say, wow, it's been almost 40 years. I said, Yeah, it's been my whole adulthood, I'm trying to manage that and do those pieces, emotions coming up and actually feeling them.
Sure.
No one wants to feel fear, panic, impending doom, dread, mortification. Those are, whew, nobody wants to feel that, and remember that. But it's important in order for your body to heal. Otherwise, you start exhibiting physical symptoms that don't have an organic basis. The doctor's like, I don't know what's wrong. Your blood work's coming back fine, but you're belching. And that was my signal. I would belch like a seal, or have migraines. It's like, this is all trauma, just you've never dealt with it. And so emotions are a huge part of this, and getting your body to release them. And there's great techniques out there now that are, non-invasive. There's neuro-emotional technique, there's EMDR, there's tapping, there's all kinds of things to help people with that. And then your soul, I think, has to be addressed if you're not getting healing, because your soul will fragment in order of a self protection. Okay. So you have to bring those soul fragments back in. And sometimes that's the work I did with a shaman that I didn't even know about when I was in Hawaii. And it's like, he was like, yeah, Nicole, you're not going to heal until that soul part comes back. And you can trust that and trust your soul.
Interesting. And so in your book, in the title of your book and throughout the book, you claim that we are all deathless,
Yes.
right? Obviously, we're all going to die at some point, right?
Physically.
But physically, correct, yes. But during that time between now and whenever that physical death date takes place, there's stuff we can do between now and then to help us live life and kind of change the narrative around like what it is that we have going on in our own lives. And through your experience, you've had a transformation of your own,
Yes.
from the type of person who you were prior to that accident. You mentioned before, the people pleaser, all these characteristics that you had back then, to the person that you are today, all these years later. How did that experience help you change into who you are today?
Well, I think, how you see death is how you see the concept of God. So it's really important for you to be able to articulate what your concept of God is, or source, or whatever, is out there, because there is something greater than me that brought me back to life. Not once, not twice, but three times. Okay. So, and any other person will tell you that's the same thing. So there's a force greater than us that is operating. And I had to take that vending machine concept of God that I had, that if I did the right behaviors and put them in there, that I would get the reward. Okay, that's not how God operates. Okay. And that was a lesson that all of the churches had taught me, was if I was a good girl and followed the rules, I would get the reward. And that is completely BS. God is not someone up there taking notes on you and judging you and all that. In fact, the judgment, it's like it, in that state that I was in up there, it was not that I suddenly had been forgiven for my mistakes. It's like they no longer existed. Nothing that I had done on earth was being weighed or measured. And it was simply the way my story had played out in this earthly realm. So there's no judgment on the other side. You're never alone. You may think you could be physically alone. From a spiritual side, you're never alone. We all have a guardian angel. We all have spirit guides. Our deceased loved ones, we can contact them. The veil is very thin. Okay. And so I started to understand all of this and realize, wow, I had the wrong concept of God. And so death scared me at 19, because I thought that I was being blamed for this wreck, which I was by my parents. But in truth, I didn't do anything. I was just an innocent passenger. And so I had to realize that I have to change that concept of God. That does not fit my experience, or just intellectually God. So that's what I would say to people, first of all, is figure out if you have a relationship with God, what is that concept? Do you see him as a person, a form, an energy? I think we're all on this road of trying to define that, but to understand that God doesn't cause things because we have free will. And that is a biggie because, how can God allow this little baby to die and blah, 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 blah. And it's like, well, there's really no explanation, but God didn't cause it. And that is the biggest thing I can tell people is your concept of God is going to define how you see death. And so I saw death as being eternally separated from my family. I was going to go to hell and they were going to go to heaven, and I never see him again because I was a quote, bad girl and had two beers, and a cigarette. And so, it's crazy now that you think about it, but it's true. So really start trying to understand that concept and start figuring it out for you what that looks like. And then I would say the other thing is we all came here to earth on a journey to learn to love and loving ourselves unconditionally is full-time work because in a human state, we're human and spiritual. Humans have a hard time loving anything unconditionally. Usually we put some kind of condition on it. If you don't listen to what I say, in fact, my dad told my siblings, this is what happens, Cole's accident, this is what happens when you don't listen to me. I mean, that just puts more fear into you, right? So if you're filled with fear, you're never going to live. You're never going to live fully. So start examining these belief systems that were handed off to you by the military or by God or the God that you were raised with or by your family and start questioning, do they work for me? Because this is your life, your soul. You will go on and your soul, that breath that keeps you living, the vapor, that is what goes up. This body just, falls away and decomposes. And that soul is light and beauty and love. And so you're not going to remember that you were suffering down here. You don't have any of that memory.
You mentioned earlier in this episode that when you were in the hospital, I believe you were talking about how your lungs were filling up with fluid and you wanted to die
Mm.
in that situation. Was it because of that calming energy that you felt in that near death experience, or was it just because it was such a painful experience, or a combination of the two?
I didn't have that memory back then.
Okay,
So it was the pain and the suffering that I had because I would start to get better and then I would really tank. And I'd start to get better, then I'd really tank. And I just was so tired of pain and suffering. And I know what it's like. I was on Valium, Demerol, and morphine every 4 hours for 7 weeks straight, for sure. And I know what being in pain is like. And you can't even get to think straight when you're in pain. So you got to deal with the pain first, and
sure.
that is one of the hardest things to do when you're in chronic pain is to find a way to mediate that or manage that so that it's not just in your mind all the time that, when I have a migraine, I have to just go to bed, take my medicine, and life stops basically. I have to get in a dark room. I can't read. I can't watch TV. It's not, you just totally have to turn life off. So that's the part you have to start managing is
Mm.
okay, the physical pain, get that tamp down so that you can processing things because as long as you're in pain, you're not going to process it. I
And
think it, go ahead.
go ahead.
No.
Yeah, so I think we're all here. We all have a reason for being here. There's a purpose for everyone who's here, whether you understand what your purpose is or not, kind of irrelevant right now. I think we all do have a purpose, and your purpose
Yes.
may be to show someone who you may not even know right now how to live life or do something or be a better person, be better at something at whatever it is that you're doing. But we all have a purpose and we're all here. And I think in your case, your purpose is coming back and spreading this message about how to not fear the
Yeah.
inevitable. We all, our bodies all will die at some point, but don't be afraid of that and continue to live life and do things that make you happy, make other people happy,
Yes.
spread happiness and hope
Find
and
find
joy,
yeah, and
right?
that's it. I think when you're in so much fear, you miss the joy, you miss the happiness, you miss being in the present moment where those emotions can take over. And then if you can't experience that, then you get really depressed and are like, well, what's it all about anyway? So you've got to take advantage of those moments. And sometimes you have to push yourself to do that, but just be grateful, oh, that the sun is shining and that you can breathe and, simple things that we take for granted that, 40 years ago, I couldn't do, and it's just like, okay, this means I can do XYZ today, and give service. When you're able to give a service, you feel better yourself. When you
Right.
can help someone else, that's always an uplifter, and I would say also not to watch a lot of violent TV, that doesn't help our vibration as well, and there's just with the pandemic, we've been isolated and watching a lot of stuff, but watching a lot of, bang 'em, shooting, all that kind of stuff is not good for our psyche either, So, and also just working on uh awakening to the being that you think you were called to be, not who someone else told you would be. And that's what I had to get out of under with my parents. My dad told me that this is what I should be. And now we don't talk, and that's taken, that's hard for me because I was raised where family's everything and all this. But when parents or people are toxic around you or narcissistic or judge you or critical, you got to get them out of your life because that negativity is sucking up at you and it is depleting you of finding the joy or feeling the joy and the happiness. So you need to start looking at how you can cut those relationships off or minimize contact with those people.
Right. And I have had other guests on the podcast who've told similar stories, not as far as near death experiences go, but as far as, you know, cutting ties with those toxic people in their lives. There's one guy that I had on the podcast years ago who had grown up in an environment where there's a lot of drugs and alcohol abuse and things like that. And he fell into that trap because that's the type of people that he grew up around. And
Right.
that was just normal. When you're around that and
Yeah.
in that environment, it just seems normal. And, he decided I need to get away from this because if I keep going down this road, I'm going to die. I can't live this way. And so he moved away, was homeless for a little while, and ended up cleaning himself up, getting a job, getting back on his feet, drug free, alcohol free, all that stuff for quite some time. And I forget exactly how many years it's been, but I know the guy, he's still doing really well. And so, but he had to cut ties with those people. He hasn't come back to the area that he grew up in. He lost contact with his family and other people, but those were the people who were dragging him down, kind of like an anchor,
Yeah.
just sinking down, and it's unfortunate. Obviously family is really important, but sometimes there's some people who are going to be toxic in your life and you have to make the tough decision as to whether or not those people are worth keeping around in your life. I mean, obviously you want to try to help them if you can, but some people are beyond that and they
Yeah.
can't be helped. And obviously that guy's situation and your situation are totally different. I think this other guy, the family situation was not coming from a place of love and caring or anything like that. I don't know your father. I don't know that situation, but I'm, I would venture a guess that he wasn't out there intentionally trying to harm anybody
Yeah.
with his thoughts. You know what I'm saying? And
Yeah.
with his actions and stuff like that. It may be misguided perhaps in how he went about doing things, but definitely wasn't done in any kind of malicious intent or anything
Right.
like that.
Right.
So, I just from an outsider perspective looking in, I could be totally off on that. Um, but yeah, it's true. You might have to figure that out and decide to break ties with people. And, at the end of the day, death is not something to fear. I think that's kind of the message here. Death is not something to fear. Obviously, don't go and do risky things that are going to advance
Ex-
accelerate that
exactly.
that that death, but
Yeah.
it's not something to fear.
No, John,
if you're gonna
John,
do something
John Lennon.
risky,
Yeah,
right,
John Lennon actually said it really well. He said, "In death, it doesn't scare him." He said, I'm just getting in one car and going into the next car, you know?
right.
And that's kind of like what our soul's doing. It's just going back home. And, this isn't our first rodeo, our soul will incarnate in a different form, in a different way. And there are lessons to learn, but they're ultimately, I think, about expanding our soul's capacity for life.
Well, it's a great way to look at it, and I think a great place to wrap this up. I'd like to give you the chance to tell people where they can go to learn more about you and your story and get a copy of your book. You mentioned that you have a free copy, the free like first chapter of the book
Yeah.
available. Tell people where they can go to find that and get a copy of the book.
Okay. It's at www.nicolekerr, Nicoleker, all one word. And on there, my website, you can click the contact and it will say, send me a free sample chapter, and I will do that. Also, I'm on Facebook, nicole.angelique.kerr. I'm on Instagram, same thing, nicole.angelique.kerr, and I'm on LinkedIn. Those are the only 3 social media platforms I can handle. I'm a one woman show here. The book is You Are Deathless, and it is on Amazon. It is on Barnes and Noble. They have it. The paperback version is on sale right now for $9.99. It's a great, if you have a book club, it's a great book club. I have book club questions in there, and I will try to pop in on a Zoom. When you have your discussion, if you choose my book as book of the month or whatever, just let me know ahead of time and I'll try to work on the time zone difference, but I will pop in and talk to you guys. And then, I think it talks about so much more than just the near death experience. It's more about the spiritual principles and the common lessons than it is about the beauty, and how the other side is just all of that is amazing, because so many people have already written about that. We all agree that it's amazing, it's beautiful, it's pain free, it's all this stuff. I think it's the lessons here that, like everything and everybody is connected. We need to work on that one a little bit more, as a society, instead of being so divisive. So that's kind of where I go with it.
Well, Nicole, it's been a pleasure speaking with you today. I will have links to all of that in the show notes. So anyone
Okay.
who is looking to follow you on social media, get in touch with you for their book club or anything like that, get a free copy of that first chapter, or to more importantly, buy a copy of the book. I have links for all of that in the show notes and much more. So thank you again for taking the time to join me and sharing your story. It's really inspirational and kind of uplifting message that you had to offer. So thank you so much for that.
God, thank you. And I just want to say, God bless to everybody. And, just take care of yourself. Put yourself as the priority, because nobody else will if you don't. So, you're number one.
All right. Thank you.
Okay. Bye bye.
Thanks for listening to the Drive On podcast. If you want to support the show, please check out Scott's book, Surviving Son, on Amazon. All of the sales from that book go directly back into this podcast and work to help veterans in need. You can also follow the Drive On podcast on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube, and wherever you listen to podcasts.